to another episode of my weird little podcast. Today we have Patrick, who's here a lot. I don't know if you heard Susie in the background meowing. She really wants to go out right now. So give me 2 seconds here. Go. All right, sorry. You know when you open the door for them to go out and then they don't go out and they just look at it like, why are you opening this door? I just wanted to scream at the crack of the door. You know, why would you think that means you need to open it?
And then she bursts through my door like it's The Shining.
Oh, yeah. She like puts her 2 front paws up and just like pushes and like
Right? Yeah.
comes through. I don't know. It reminds me more of like Kramer from Seinfeld coming in.
Yeah, that's true. Right, yeah, exactly.
I'm Tia. Hey, everyone. This is my weird little podcast. Although it is a what is it? The royal we. It is the royal my. Could be yours. You know, if you are referring it to other people, which you should be doing, please do that. Then yes, I guess it is yours as well. So we talk about weird stuff. True crime, paranormal. I've been on like a cryptid kick for a while, but that's not what we're doing today. But there will be many, many more. My friend Sonia gave me a suggestion for a cryptid. Let me pull it up. Oh my God. Mitchell just sent me a picture of him in a wig. That made my day. I'm going to have to respond to him. Shout out to Mr. Spooky 13 for being a bestie of the podcast. Sonia gave me the suggestion for the Ninjin,Ningen, Ninjin ocean monster. I don't know what that is. I did say I was going to do an episode on mermaids, if possible in the future. Just mermaids in general. I mean, they are a cryptid, I guess, technically.
They're ocean monsters.
Ocean what?
I said they're ocean monsters.
Ocean monsters, yeah. I guess, yeah. Depending on what story you're listening to. So maybe I'll do that in the future. We'll see. But also shout out to my other listeners, Ace and Sarah, who are my coworkers as well. Thank you for putting up with my shenanigans, not only at work, but also, on your weekends when you listen to this at home. Can't get enough of me. So we'll get into our story today. Today's story suggestion came from my wonderful, beautiful niece, Sabrina. I love her so much. I'm so very proud of her. She is working very hard to get a culinary degree, and I am so excited for her. And she gave me the suggestion of this story, which is incredibly dark and disturbing. And I don't know how I feel about that. This wouldn't be a story I would typically pick. I'll be honest, because there is a lot of trauma in this story, and I tend to veer away from that sort of thing. Even though I have covered some of that in the past, I try to keep things a little lighthearted, but she wanted to hear about it, so here we go. So first off, I'm going to definitely, what is the word? I'm definitely going to give a warning ahead of time. Little preamble of this. So we do talk about incest, sexual assault, torture, abuse. So if those things are triggering to you, this would be the time to not listen to this episode. Go back to one of my earlier episodes, maybe, check out the Phantom Kangaroo episode if you haven't already, or one of those little more lighthearted episodes. Mitchell and I did a great episode on paranormal TV from the 90s, especially, and that is a lot of fun. So if this is not something for you, then that would be the episode, and now would be the time to log on to that there. So I'm going to give you 2 seconds to make your decision right now. All right. So today's story is about Eddie Lee Sexton and his family murder cult. So of course I got my information from the two pedias, Wikipedia and Murderpedia. If you haven't been to Murderpedia, what's stopping you? Check it out. I also got some of the stuff from investigationdiscovery.com, 2 YouTube channels, Summer Sanchez and Hebe GB's TV, which I thoroughly enjoyed, both of those. I love YouTube just in general. I could go on about that, but you can learn anything. You could definitely get lost down a couple of rabbit holes with that. So we'll just get into it. I'm going to hope this is short. I don't have a lot of notes on it. It's pretty straightforward because this is horribly uncomfortable. So, yeah, so we'll get into it. All right. So today's episode is on Eddie Lee Sexton and his family murder cult. So Eddie Lee Sexton was born May 12th, 1942, near rural Logan, West Virginia, to a family of coal miners. His father was part-time Baptist preacher. He was the youngest of 10 children. His father passed away in 1952 when Eddie was 10 years old. He spent some time in juvenile detention. And in 1963, when he was 21, he committed armed robbery of a gas station the day after he married his pregnant 15-year-old girlfriend. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for the robbery, and his wife filed for divorce after giving birth to a son named Patrick. And no, it's not you. Just letting you know.
Thank you.
Although
Thank you.
the timeline, no, the timeline wouldn't match up. You'd be a lot older.
Okay.
Now, not off to a great start for Eddie Lee Sexton, but that is no excuse for what is to come later on. So Eddie later married Estelle May. She and him would have 12 children to get 12. All right. Make a note of that now. Eddie would later marry Estelle May, and they would have 12 children together. Eddie and Estelle settled in Jackson Township, Ohio, near Cleveland. Eddie was regarded as charming and polite upon first impression, but those who knew him well saw him as a serial con artist and fraudster. Though receiving Social Security disability payments due to an allegedly serious back injury, he also worked for cash as a painter and handyman. He was suspected of having committed insurance fraud by setting 3 fires at his homes in the 1980s and faking burglaries and falsely reporting stolen items. So, yeah. So in the 70s, he briefly worked as an independent Christian preacher, because of course he did. And he had a highly unorthodox doctrine emphasizing sex and apocalyptic predictions that he would later use to indoctrinate and intimidate his children. He would hold private wedding in his front yard for town members. So that's what he was kind of known for in the town, was like having these small wedding ceremonies for the town members. I mean, I guess he was well liked, still, even though he obviously wasn't trustworthy, but like it's like always this way with like people who are actually bad people, but they're using like Christianity and religion as like a guise. Like they're very charming, very charismatic, but there's something about them that isn't trustworthy. And people who really look deeper and really like have the veil lifted from their eyes, like can see that, but some people just can't. And, you know, it's so bad. Anyways,
Yeah.
journalist Lowell Caulfield wrote, Eddie Lee Sexton certainly maintained his own place of worship, but nobody could figure out what gospel he was preaching. A little general occult, a little fundamentalism, a little Satanism, a little sci-fi hustle. Neighbor Augusta Houston would report that Eddie claimed to worship both God and the devil. So this sounds very much like what's his name? L. Ron Hubbard. You know, it sounds very much like let's just combine everything into a convoluted mess and use it to really push forth my own personal narrative. You know, and
Yeah.
honestly, that's what Aleister Crowley did. Also, a friend of the podcast, Mr. Anton LaVey, who I have very mixed feelings about as well, definitely used a lot of occultisms, to push his own narrative. Granted, Anton LaVey was just, playing a keyboard with his cats in his smelly house, not, and taking, doing backyard photo shoots with, Jane Mansfield, but, not going to condone using other religions and putting your own spin on them in order to gain fame and followers. Like, definitely not going to do that. Sounds fun, but we're not doing that. So his son Charles, so if I refer to Charles a lot in this, we're actually talking about his son Charles, who came out much later, and he spoke a lot about his father. He was definitely part of a lot of these horrible things that I'm going to talk about. Here's your other, moment if you need to leave. But Charles would talk later, and he actually, he was the one to come to police and give like a full confession on his role in everything that I'm about to talk about. And he very much admitted that he was complicit in these things. He was a child through most of this, and this was his father. So, I guess he gets a pass, because he didn't know better. But when I refer to Charles, that's who I'm referring to as one of these 12 children. So yeah, I'm gonna sip my coffee before I get into too much of this. So Charles, the son, noted that everybody adored and loved the seemingly polite and religious Eddie, but behind closed doors, he made his family's life hell. There's no explanation how much hate I've got for the man, Charles Sexton would say about his father. So, according to Charles, his father's manipulation stretched back to when he was a young boy. One evening, he and his brother woke up and saw a beast tapping at their window. By the time the terrified children alerted their mother, the creature was gone. Eddie had actually dressed up in disguise and claimed that the boys had seen Satan. And he told them, however, that if they followed absolutely everything he told them to do, that the devil would never return to hurt them. Charles would say, my father, he dabbled in cults. He was his own church. And he shared that one day my father told all of us kids that he was the Alpha, the Omega, and the beginning and the end. Things started getting really crazy in the house, he would say, as the situation with his father developed over time. On another occasion, Charles recalled that his father slit their cat Misty's throat in front of his children and family during a bizarre ceremony, drained the pet's blood into a chalice and then forced everyone to drink it. He told us never to talk about it, never speak of it. So
Jeez.
years later, their babysitter would recall the terrible details. That the Sexton children were shy, hungry children who seemed starved for attention. As young as 3, they were sometimes left tied to their beds in the dark, in their own waste as punishment. They lived in rooms without electricity, without furniture. And when it started to rain, the children would run outside in the rain and raise their faces to the sky. Jesus is coming, they would say, hoping he would take them away.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
so he would hold seances with his children that included animal sacrifices. He made the children believe that he had the power to summon and communicate with spirits, and made them sign a contract with their blood, pledging their obedience to their father. The children were only allowed to have one friend each. They were not allowed to go to friends' houses or have friends over. So this was a form of the father trying to isolate them, give them the illusion of, well, I allowed you to have one friend, so that gives the illusion of freedom, but it is really trying to alienate and isolate them. And he would encourage the children to rat on each other. One day, Sherry was caught by one of her brothers talking to one of her teachers, and her father beat her. Eddie would also threaten to take the life of their mother. He also, on top of all of this, he was sexually assaulting his children and had several children with his own daughters. Eddie then entered into marriages with at least 2 or more of his own daughters and fathered multiple children with Pixie, his daughter, while she was in high school. And we're going to talk about Pixie quite a lot because she is a piece of work. And, only excuse I could give her is that obviously she's been raised into a very disgusting and traumatic environment, which isn't setting her up for having good judgment. But, oh man, she is
Okay.
definitely brainwashed, when it comes down to it. So there was definitely a wedding ceremony between Eddie and Pixie. This is something that was definitely documented or, recounted by Charles later on. So one day, Pixie came down into the living room, and she was wearing a white veil. Eddie announced to the family that he was going to marry Pixie. He performed the ceremony in the living room with his entire family watching, including his wife. Apparently, she was looking down at her feet the entire time because this was probably very upsetting to her, but
Right.
she couldn't
Yeah.
express that. There was no way that she could express that, to this man who is willing to threaten her life uh, to the children,
Right. Yeah.
So it's, yeah. Um, According to Charles, Pixie was actually happy about the marriage. He would end up having 3 children with her. Eddie and Pixie would end up having 3 children together. So when she was pregnant with her 3rd child, out of fear of being found out, Eddie encouraged Pixie to go out and find a really nice guy so she could claim that this other guy was the father of her child. So he actually, and this sounds so much like, oh God, what was that? Oh my God, what was that cult where they did Flirty Fishy? Where they were like encouraging the women to go out and flirt to get more people into the cult. Children
Jeez.
of God, I think, is what the cult was. And it sounds so much like that, and so disturbing,
That's crazy.
I will say
Yeah.
the Source family kind of did that as well, although the Source family definitely is not as bad as what's going on here, what happened with Children of God. Source family, I did an episode on that of on Hollywood's Haunted, the podcast. And honestly, they're my favorite cult because they didn't do a lot that was harmful and dangerous. They really just served a lot of vegan food from their fancy dancy little restaurant on Sunset Boulevard. And, Jacoba took care of himself at the end. Instead of obliterating everyone, he just kind of took his own life, whether directly or not. You'll have to listen to that episode to find out exactly how he did that, but he definitely brought the whole situation to an end, which is probably the best thing you can do for your cult, is just let them go. not
Let your
not
people go.
take away their future, just let them do their own thing at a point. But they're interesting little cult. But they also there was a lot of like having the women be these flirty, honey traps for these men. So that's what this all reminds me of here. So she did actually go out and she found a nice guy. His name was Joel Good. They went to school together, and he was nice, obviously overly trusting, and was considered to be slow-witted. So they took advantage of maybe his lower intelligence, which is very sad. Joel's family, of course, was cautious of the relationship, but Joel didn't listen. Pixie and Joel got married and would name their baby boy Skipper Lee. So continuing on, the unhinged Eddie next began training his children how to fight and kill in a war he believed that would eventually happen. He would eventually wage war against the cops over their land and family. So this is something that actually did happen later on, but he started training them already in his mind that something was going to happen. So April of 1992, his daughter Michelle actually spoke with social services at her school, and the authorities launched an investigation. When the police showed up, the kids confirmed that Michelle confirmed what Michelle had said, and 3 children were actually removed, but they were then returned later due to lack of evidence, which is, the system is not good, At this time, there were only 6 children living in the home at this time. Most of the children had already grown up and moved on. So November, police were investigating again and moved in to remove all of the children. Eddie then barricaded the entire home. Eddie called the police himself and told them that he would take the lives of his children should they arrive. He also instructed his children to shoot the police if needed. This resulted in a 2-day standoff that ended after a deputy convinced Eddie to surrender. But Eddie would be bonded out of jail. And the Sextons, including Pixie's boyfriend Joel and their new baby Skipper, fled to a campground in Florida. So at this time, Eddie, Estelle, Willie, Charles, Sherry, Pixie, Joel, and Pixie's 3 kids are camped out at Little Manatee Star Park in Florida. And this time, the kids were actually drinking quite a bit. There was also reports of them inhaling fumes. So Eddie started training these children on drills to prepare them for war, which he had done in the past. But this time he was kind of putting them through like a boot camp. Baby Skipper soon fell ill and, of course, was not taken to the hospital. I don't know if you're shaking your head or if you're trying to pet the cat on the back of the chair right now, but both are good choices.
Now that it was petting the cat, but it's also shaking the head. Like, oh my god! Like it just gets crazier and crazier.
Yeah. Luckily, we're about little more than halfway through this, so there's not much more to the story. I do encourage you guys, if the story does interest you, that go on YouTube. There's several YouTubers that talk about this story, and they really each get into different aspects of the story. I really scaled this down because I'm very uncomfortable talking about these things. So I tried really hard not to go into detail about some of the darker things that happen. I really don't like talking about assault too much. That's not really what I want to get into. I'm already uncomfortable right here, but I do encourage you guys, if this does interest you, there is a lot more out there with this story. This is just a little bit of it, but we're about to get into the real part of this here. So baby Skipper soon fell ill. She of course was not taken to the hospital. I don't know if that's because of their beliefs, or most likely I feel like it was out of fear of finding out who Skipper's real father was and what was actually going on with this family. And the baby would cry constantly. And Eddie ordered Pixie to quiet the baby, or he would do it for her. And this is where there are very conflicting accounts of what happens at this point. So, but most of them say that Pixie put her hand over Skipper's mouth to quiet her, and Skipper would pass away. So, the baby was buried in the forest, wrapped in a blanket in a gym bag, placed in trash bags, and buried in the woods. Joel was distraught. Obviously, he thought this child was his. He loved this baby quite a lot. And he was distraught about losing his son. Pixie had told Joel that the baby had died of SIDS. And Joel would start actually questioning the family at this time. He started to get really suspicious. This was kind of the breaking point. And he was asking questions about everything. And he would eventually find out who the father of the first two children were, which was Eddie. And he started to suspect that Pixie may have killed Skipper. So Joel actually went to the local library with Pixie, and he wanted to research SIDS. Eddie had followed Pixie and Joel to the library, and there was an altercation that was actually documented at the Tampa University, November 30th of 1993. It was witnessed by Gail Novak, who was a librarian there. Now, Eddie would eventually convince Joel that he would fix the situation by replacing Skipper. And his plan was to steal a baby from his son, Eddie Jr., in Ohio. So Charles and Eddie ended up driving to Ohio. Now, Charles at this time was complicit with his father. He did what his father told him. And Charles is, like I said, is the one who most of the story we get from his account, because he would be the one to talk to police later on. And Charles was instructed to get rid of Eddie's wife. So they were going to knock on the door, kill Eddie's wife, and then take the baby. Luckily, when they got to the home, nobody was there when they knocked on the door. Now, Joel actually wanted to go back to Ohio. I don't know why exactly, but Joel tried to leave. And Eddie ended up saying to him that the only way you will go back to Ohio is as a corpse, which is foreshadowing here. So Eddie starts another plan to get rid of Joel. So Eddie starts training his son Willie on how to use a garrote. A garrote is actually like a string thing, yeah, with two handles, and you wrap it around someone's neck to strangle them. And so sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas of 1993, Willie took Joel into the woods and strangled him. There's also an account that Charles was with them or Pixie was with them. Like this, some of these stories, like who actually went to the woods and who wasn't, uh, you know, is kind of all over the place, but it definitely was Willie who took Charles out to the woods. I mean, who took Joel. Willie took Joel out to the woods to strangle him. He was buried close to Skipper. Sherry would claim that Pixie actually helped with the murder. There was also a claim that Charles was there and that he was there with Willie the whole time. Willie was crying the entire time because he did not want to do this. I believe Willie was the youngest, and he also was like mentally disabled, but they obviously probably weren't very well educated, So there was an arrest warrant put out by the FBI, a national arrest warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. And this was for Eddie and the entire family because they had fled to Florida. So in January of 1994, Eddie made a phone call to his brother to Indiana and charged the call to an old number where they were able to trace the call to a payphone in Little Manatee River State Park. There's also like some other accounts of like how he actually got caught, but it did all come down to like a phone call that ended up being traced to them back to this park that they were staying at. It was also said that he was like staying with his brothers at the time at the house, and he had made 2 phone calls, but they eventually track Eddie and his family down to this park that they're staying at. On January 14th, 1994, the FBI arrested Eddie and Estelle in the parking lot of a Winn-Dixie grocery store. The authorities questioned the children, and Charles tells them everything, leading them to the bodies of Joel and Skipper. Their bodies were brought back to Ohio so Joel's family could bury them. Joel's family opted out of a paternity test on Skipper. They wanted to just keep this child as their own. They didn't want to know whether it was Joel's or not, as Joel loved this child. Charles was granted immunity for his help with authorities. Eddie, Estelle, May, Pixie, and Willie were charged. In November of 1994, Eddie was sentenced to death and sent to Florida's Union Correctional Facility. After some appeals, he was granted a second trial, but was again sentenced to death. Eddie would pass away in prison in 2010. Estelle May was sent back to Ohio to be tried for sexual and physical abuse on her children. She was sentenced to life in prison for complicity to rape. She was sent to Ohio's Reformatory for Women, and Estelle May died in prison. Pixie pled guilty to manslaughter in the case of Skipper, sentenced to 6 to 12 years, and Willie was sentenced to 25 years for the death of Joel. And that is all I'm going to say on that today, because that was a rough one to get through. So, there is much more out there on this story, and I find true crime fascinating. And I will talk more about true crime on this podcast going into the future as well. But hopefully Saturday, Teresa has a much more lighthearted story for next week. This one put Susie to sleep on the back of your chair, though. She seems to be fine with it. It's like when I listen to Unsolved Mysteries to go to bed at night. It's
that's why I think
yeah.
this one is in. The cats are trained to be like, ah,
Oh,
missing and murdered
murder.
for 3 years. Mm.
We're just gonna go to bed. Um, so, I hope you all have a better rest of your day. I don't know if that helped at all. Probably not. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap this one up. That is the story of Eddie Lee Sexton. Thank you, Sabrina, for suggesting that.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff there. Now, you all know where to find this podcast, and if you don't, it's everywhere. Please like, share, subscribe. Please tell your friends. Please look at my TikToks. And I hope you all have a spooky rest of your day. Creep it real. And I'm out. Ooh.